Racing across the picturesque landscape, a massive stretch of mountains divided a continent. Its foreboding snow-capped peaks peered down at the people dwelling to the east of its mighty walls with stoic resolve. For as long as there had been a people, the mountain ridge had stood, each year growing in stature and prominence in the hearts and minds of the peoples of Ashe. Among those who lived under the shadow of the great formation, it was counted as folly to approach the enchanted terrain, as each rock and stone was turned against any interlopers. Yet, with winter on the doorstep of the heartlands, two souls dared venture along one of the numerous narrow passes of the strangest peak within the long mountain range. The Barren Summit, named thus for it was the sole mount in this vast chain, whose cap was adorned with neither ice nor snow. It was as if the very stones rejected the snow's embrace. The people of Arden avoided the mountain ridge in general, but this mountain was cursed, though by what and to what end no one knew. The barren summit bore many secrets. However, the two weary travelers came in search of one curse that the people of Arden had become all too familiar with. Concealed deep within the mountain resided a band of cutthroats who were known as the Vermin of Malor. Among their ranks, the pair hoped to find refuge. In the distance, the splendor of the mountain ridge had been a source of curiosity that had never failed to inspire Drake's sense of adventure. However, the usual allure of the Blue Mountains had lost all their appeal, now that he was forced to traverse their cumbersome paths. The fog loomed heavy in the early morning air, causing the two haggard travelers to lurch up the rocky mountain pass, compounding their frustrations. Drake's uncle muttered miserably under his breath as he maneuvered his girth between a particularly narrow portion of the ravine. Drake's head bowed low, exhausted as they had traveled through the night. Groggily, the lithe thief followed his uncle, nudging against the walls of the hidden passage. The stones bore a strange warmth that would have been welcome in the crisp autumn morning had they not been tainted by a faint, noxious aroma. Steadying himself against the rock face, he felt the chill in his fingers dissipate. Staring absently into the expanse above, he found himself reflecting on his last night in Hydria and the events that had led to the pair's hasty departure. The adventure that had immediately ensued their escape had made it easy to avoid mulling over the details of his missteps. There had been so many exciting things to witness on each step of their journey, and having never been outside the grand walls of the fabled city meant each natural wonder had been fresh to the urchin's charmed eyes. Even during the gloomy night, while they traversed up the mountain, the wild fascinations that had accompanied traversing the mountain ridge had fully occupied his mind. While apprehension still lingered, the bleak and narrow path offered him a little in the way of distraction. Gathering his tattered coat about him, dark visions filled his mind's eye as he recalled the fiery inferno he had fled. The clang of steel plate ringing throughout the night, distant cries, and then the dreadful stillness. All resounded once more. A mixture of frantic terror and numbing guilt enveloped him like an abyss, till a meaty hand shook him from his stupor. His Uncle Cason's kind eyes staring into his own under thick, bushy red eyebrows. He muttered some words to which Drake nodded before taking a deep breath, clearing his mind, and pressing onward once more. He did not hear his uncle's words. The boy seldom listened to the older man, but the words had been kind, and he took comfort in his uncle's eyes. Drake pushed the dark cloud looming over him out of his mind. He would have all winter to reflect on his plight. A chilling draft welcomed him back to the waking world, seeking in vain to dampen his spirits. But a benefit of youth is to be easily distracted. Soon, visions of a warm hearth and promises of a full belly reinvigorated his steps. He had been cautioned that they would be met by a healthy amount of trepidation from the inhabitants of Malor, but Cason assured the boy that they would know his name. Even if his acquaintances had forgotten him, they still had enough coin to barter their way into a friend's home. The boy was quite ready to find himself safe within the confines of a city, or a village at least, not only for the hospitality that awaited him, but to be out of the wilderness. Drake had never felt more exposed than when he first set foot on the Barren Summit. When dusk fell, the shadows had pranced eerily in the ever-changing light. The stories his mother told him of this most abnormal place weighed heavily on his mind. His imagination seized the opportunity to conjure many of the baleful creatures from her tales. Behind every rock and stone, the phantoms had taken shape to haunt him. Even Kaysen had been annoyed with his hesitance, but Drake suspected that the irritation had not been entirely due to him slowing their pace. He had seen his uncle casting wary glances at dark corners a fair few times. On occasion, a sudden gust of wind gave life to the specters, carrying chilling cries throughout the rocky outcrop. The thought of eternally concealed figures with hate-filled eyes leering down at them, issuing their welcome to the unwitting travelers, still froze his blood when the gloom encroached upon them. Abruptly, the pair came to a halt as a disembodied voice barked out some brutish threat in an accent so thick that Drake could only understand the malice spat into each word. Hailing back, Drake's uncle panted out a breathy salute. Once he caught a second wind, he crafted some superfluous eloquence that held no real meaning, but it sounded pleasing to the ears and was undeniably good-natured. However, the old gentleman's pleasantries fell on deaf ears as the elderly lookout, now confused, grew even more agitated. Drake was certain that the brigand was hell-bent on their downfall when another guardsman announced his presence, lantern in tow, casting a welcome light on the situation. The old crow balked at the second's boldness, though the lantern-wielding guardsman paid the first little heed and ordered the pair to state their business. Kaysen seized his chance and dialed up the charm, weaving some approximation of the truth into a neat and tidy story. Drake smiled to himself as he listened to his uncle's fanciful tale. He had always been in awe of Kaysen's mastery over the common language. It was not long before the second grew impatient, standing in the open, bristling in the wind, staring down at the obviously harmless pair and quibbling about their story. He ordered them up the ledge where the two guardsmen were perched. The old codger made sure to voice his disapproval, and had ample opportunity as Kaysen awkwardly scaled the steep outcrop. As soon as the pair had made it atop the vantage, the first rattled his rusty falchion and issued a threat before attempting to shove Kaysen forward. However, the old man's gaunt body broke against Kaysen's stout frame. Irritably, the guard turned his ire to Drake, cracking a sharp blow right above the boy's ear. He stayed quiet, leaving the old man muttering inaudible curses under his breath before following behind his uncle, while the lantern-wielding guard lighted the path. The ornery fellow's woeful attempts at interrogation persisted as the pair were marched up the path, jabbering incessantly in his shrill North Langetian accent, which was challenging enough to understand as is. Uncle Kaysen attempted to satisfy the guard's onslaught of questions, but the old man could not be appeased, and eventually Kaysen held his tongue. Soon the small band entered a homey encampment, illuminated by the cheerful orange light of a campfire, where sat a plump man with chap-red cheeks, who moments earlier had been wrapped in sweet slumber. The third fellow, annoyed, leered at his cackling companion, who had pushed his way to the front of the party. Lazily, the sleepy fellow turned his gaze toward the intruders, no less annoyed, surveying them with an appraising eye. This did not perturb Drake in the slightest, as he stumbled carelessly toward the flame in its glowing warmth. Joy of joys, atop the fire was a cooking stone, on which merrily sizzled corn cakes. The scent alone offered condolement to his empty belly. While Kaysen and the guards deliberated, Drake huddled by the fire at his uncle's feet. The young thief was soon locked in a game of sleight of hand with the ornery guard, whose attention was divided by his attempts to convince the others to rid themselves of the interlopers. Even with the guard's full attention, it would not have taken Drake long to obtain his prize. Within mere moments, the game was won, and the boy was nibbling contentedly on a steaming corn cake just out of sight of the onlookers, entirely unconcerned with the quibbling around him. It was decided that 2 of the guards would escort the pair to Nebulobayo. He would decide their fate, though it pained him to leave the comfort of the cheerful flame. A sharp word from Kaysen had the boy following doggedly behind his elder. Despite their lukewarm welcome, Kaysen was in excellent spirits, constantly rubbing his grubby hands together. His attitude was infectious, but Drake's spirits were lifted infinitely more by the stolen corn cakes he nibbled under his ragged hood. The narrow, jagged path developed into a small hollow under the gray dawn that was only now dimly showing on the eastern horizon. Drake and Kaysen were led along the outer ring of Malur. Here, stone hovels and thatched roofs dotted the way. The first of the occupants of these shacks were beginning to stir from their quarters, ready for the labor of the day. Drake could see them eyeing his uncle and himself curiously. However, they said nothing, and soon the guardsman led them to a more congested area of the village. The enclave expanded, and Drake found himself being led deeper through Malur. The further they delved into the small village, the sound of a revelry that had lasted throughout the night was finally dying down. People staggered from building to building as a few pitiful souls tried to keep the festivities alive. One player sawed absently on a fiddle, emitting one of the most painful sounds Drake had ever heard, till one hungover woman slapped the poor thing from his hands, dashing the instrument against the stone. Most were too preoccupied with their various states of drunkenness to pay any mind to the small band. But soon Drake noticed that they had gained a humble, yet growing entourage. Drawing closer to his uncle, Drake could see an unwavering air of confidence on the fellow's fleshy face, despite sweat beginning to bead on Kaysen's broad brow. The buildings parted before them, allowing for the now sizable following to spread out, filling the corners of Malur's Square. The golden rays of first light burst through the gloomy clouds of impending winter and illuminated the grandest structure in the village. Here the crowd stopped and waited as the disagreeable lookout swiftly crept up the stairs to the ornately carved door. Drake could hear music playing from its balcony by a hidden composer, but all faded with the lanky lookout's mousy rat-a-tat-tat on the door. The man quickly stepped off the porch with an ungainly lurch, slipping behind the younger guard. With bated breath, Drake waited for the occupant of the grand villa to stir. The great crowd of thieves, vagabonds, and wenches who had gathered themselves round about to witness the pair's judgment left Drake with an insistent urge to shrink back into the crowd and cloak himself in the mass of humanity. Even as his dread was growing, his uncle placed his hand on his shoulder and whispered it for him to stand firm and raise his chin. The door finally swung open, and out stepped a gallant man, tall and handsome, dressed in a fine array of noble crimson garb, which now bore a debonair fitting. His gaze quickly came to rest on the younger bandit, who had held his ground, waiting dutifully to issue his report. His booming voice could be heard as easily from the front of the crowd as the people making up the rear. "Who are these people, George, and why have you brought them to me?" "Forgive me, Captain," the bandit stammered, bowing awkwardly, "but these trespassers were found walking the way, and have sought amnesty from those who would seek to hold them." The captain's shrewd eyes fell on Kaysen, and he stepped down to examine the intruders. "It's few who find their way up the mountain, and fewer still go back down. Tell me, how came you to the home of the vermin of Malur?" Kaysen stepped forward to meet the captain, bowing as deep as his formidable stomach would allow. "Thank you for allowing us intrigue, Nebulobayo. It is well with my eyes to see you in good standing with God and man. When last I was here, you were a handsome lad, by your mother's side. We have come to request your hospitality, as we are but orphans seeking shelter from the storm." The captain examined Kaysen, and then continued with a smile. "Kaysen, of Orclave, you were one of Hildebrand's men. It's been some time, and Hildebrand has been dead for 5 winters now. Every hound knows his home, Even if the old master is gone, Kaysen chirped cheerfully. Nevelabio's brow furrowed, but eventually he shook his head and retorted, "If you can find a kennel, so be it." Kaysen bowed and thanked Nevelabio for his hospitality, even as the bandit captain turned from them to re-enter his home. No sooner had Kaysen finished his platitudes, Drake felt his uncle's meaty hands fall heavily on his shoulders, and, chipperly, Kaysen guided the boy by his shoulders as they weaved their way through the dispersing crowd. "Let's see if we can find Helena." "How long will we be able to stay?" Drake asked. "Will she remember you?" Kaysen smirked, casting a shrewd eye down at his nephew. "Let's get you warmed up. We can't have our breadwinner getting sick on us. Those rags on your feet need to be changed." "Does that mean I have permission to lift what I can?" Drake smiled mischievously, craning his neck over his shoulder to look back at his uncle, as he allowed the older man to usher him down a narrow alleyway. "Keep your nose clean. I don't know these people anymore, and we can't afford to be run out of here. That royal lady need forget the face of that munchkin she found rummaging through her drawers before we make more enemies," Kaysen said as he ruffled Drake's greasy black hair. His smile quickly disappeared as the dark, narrow stone alleyway Kaysen led him down reminded Drake of the slums he had spent his life exploring in Hydria. All that was missing was the corpses hanging above the dregs row. Drake's eyes watered as he remembered the last ghastly grin looking down at him, a smile he had known all too well, contorted beyond recognition. Kaysen let out a sharp cry, snapping Drake to attention. 30 paces ahead of the pair, a woman exited her cottage carrying a load of wash in her arms. Her line-ridden face was severe and irritated, poorly masked by the rouge makeup caked on her face. Her decorative shawl hung loosely on her bony shoulders, over which streamed hair once golden, now silver. At once Helena's eyes fell on Kaysen, and her burden spilled on the stone ground. Kaysen rushed to his former flame, overjoyed at seeing her for the first time in nearly a score. "Is that you, Kaysen?" Helena cried giggly, as she leapt over the heap of discarded laundry. "In the flesh, Helena," Kaysen retorted, as he scooped her up in a bear hug, spinning her around once before he set her back on the ground. "You look well. Have the years been kind?" "Aye," Helena replied with a mirthful gleam in her eye, as she sharply jabbed Kaysen in the ribs. "Years have been too kind to you, it would seem. I've seen aught nor heard word of you for so long. I believe the axe had sent your head tumbling long ago." While old lovers recounted their younger days, another exited the house to see what all the commotion was about. Drake's breath caught in his throat when he saw a girl several winters older than himself. The mystery girl was of Teshian heritage, the near mythical country far to the south, where there was as much gold as there was sand. Drake's mother told him of the wonders that came from those lands, and how no foreigner dared to enter that ancient realm. Kaysen himself had been placed under her spell, and his mouth wagged mid-sentence. Helena smiled ruefully and struck Kaysen in his belly, snapping him from his enchantment. Quickly he bowed with all the grace at his disposal, and begged the lady's pardon, to which she meekly accepted, and asked Helena to introduce her to her companions. For the first time, Helena and Kaysen took notice of Drake, and he was called to his guardian's side, so that he might make her acquaintance. The young woman's name was Ashe, a child who had been left on the roadside when her caravan had run afoul of the vermin of mailers some years ago. Helena had taken pity on the child and raised her in Mailer. Kaysen, introduced by Helena, set all his charm and fine upbringing to work on the village maiden. Drake, for his part, issued a shy salutation to the women. Helena's attention was captured at once by Drake in his shabby attire. "I can't believe you traveled up these mountains dressed like this," she exclaimed, pushing past Kaysen while he engaged Ashe in pleasantries. "Come inside. You have no color, child. Come in." Helena cried as she seized Drake under the arm and let him pass the beauty into her cottage. Inside there were the remains of breakfast, still on the sturdy kitchen table, by which a cookpot still simmered with cornmeal grits. "Take a seat by the fire, child. You'll have a bowl and hot grog before you know it." Helena was a woman of her word, and Drake soon found himself on his second bowl. His uncle had to caution him from eating any more, since he had eaten so little over the past several days. Only at the threat of his guts bursting from all the food he had consumed did Drake at last relent, and he joined his uncle, nursing a warm brew. Drake was captivated by her, but found even her exotic charm could not stave off his exhaustion. Helena ordered the older girl to put Drake to bed, and she led him to the back room where she and Helena slept. Tucking Drake in as gently as his own mother had in times past, Ashe stayed with him till sleep consumed him.